Last week, this Toronto City Council passed the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and I'm going to talk to Mike, councillor from Ward 11, about that. So welcome to the interview, Mike.
Hi there.
Look, what exactly is the treaty, and what did the City Council of Toronto commit to?
Well, the treaty is an international call for the global community to take certain steps, governments around the world to take certain steps about the expansion of fossil fuel industry around the world, acknowledging that we're all in this together, right? And if we don't start taking those steps, but some jurisdictions take steps and some jurisdictions don't, well, you end up in a situation where some feel like they are hard done by and can't compete. And so this is the motion itself does three things. One, it endorses the various elements of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty that have been outlined for the international community. Two, it asks our city manager to send a letter to the Prime Minister of Canada requesting that the federal government start the negotiation of that treaty on a global basis. And then third, City Council affirm its ongoing commitment to the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement and the greenhouse gas reduction targets that we have already set as a city, which are to be net zero by 2050 or before. And so while passing this motion is largely symbolic in that it's pushing the agenda of this non-proliferation treaty forward, it is recommitting our local efforts to achieve net zero by 2050, which will actually see a report come back later this year that will give us further steps to take in order to achieve that.
Now, I understand there are some interesting politics at play, Mike, because the provincial government of Doug Ford is not, climate friendly. I think that your council has already passed a motion expressing concern about the expanding use of natural gas in electricity generation and the GHG emissions that will come from that if more gas is used. So is this in some ways an attempt to get the provincial government to move a little quicker in this area?
Well, it's the provincial and the federal government. The GTA in Toronto specifically is a really important electoral unit in the scheme of both provincial and federal politics and in Canada, in Ontario and in Canada. And so signaling that these particular seats in the House of Commons are supported by local government officials that want to see action in this, and with the vote won 22-2, so it's a pretty clear indication, I think, that that the voices, the locally elected voices, are interested in seeing some climate action. But I think it's trying to send that message as we have likely a federal election later this year and a provincial election the following year, that we want to see those levels of government take serious action. And there is support locally in the GTA if those governments choose to take those actions.
Now, I understand there was another motion approved on Wednesday that would accelerate the retrofit, energy efficient retrofit of buildings. Can you tell us about that?
Well, there was actually three other items on the agenda that of particular note, and one was improvements to our green building standards. So new buildings will have to meet a higher standard in the coming years than they have in the past. We've had a green standard now for just over a decade, and we've continually ramped it up with the goal of having all new buildings by 2030 being net zero or near zero. And so that passed unanimously, I believe, and we've seen a lot of success with the approach that the city has taken, which is every couple of years it gets stricter and stricter as the industry adjusts and they're able to tool up. The next report that passed was the city's buildings and what we should be doing to build new city buildings to a certain standard, as well as retrofit existing buildings. Because really, if we're not doing it and unable to demonstrate leadership on that, then how can we expect others to? And so that report passed. Now, it didn't commit us to anything, but it did outline what investments would need to be made. And it's about a $2 to $4 billion investment, depending on how deep we want to go. And I'll certainly be there to fight for the deepest possible retrofits in order for us to achieve the most significant impact on our climate footprint. And the third report was on existing buildings, and that focused on what supports do we need to put into place in order to address the energy performance of the buildings that we already have. And they ranged anything from asking the other levels of government for support to building owners to do the retrofits, which is largely how they've been done in the past, as well as the labeling of buildings. And so they're labeling for their energy performance in order to give an indication to the industry and to purchasers, as well as to building operators, of how they stack up compared to other buildings. And then there's everything in between. How can we convene and help move the industry forward in that regard? And those are the things that we had identified as steps the city can take. And we voted, and I believe that vote was unanimous, to continue moving us into that direction about providing supports for existing buildings to be retrofitted.
Mike, final question. And I'm asking for a little peek into the, take the pulse of Torontonians around climate change and the energy transition and the kind of efforts you're talking about. Very often when I'm interviewing experts about Canada, they're talking about BC and Quebec being leaders in these areas. And everybody's waiting to see when Ontario will catch up. And do you think that voters are really ready for this to accelerate Ontario and the City of Toronto's climate activities?
Well, I think that the City of Toronto has been a leader for a lot of years. We've waned on occasion, and we're so dependent on a provincial government to give us the tools necessary to do certain work that has impacted, their lack of support has impacted our achievement of some of our goals. But if you look back, the Toronto Atmospheric Fund now has been, and this was a large dedicated fund of money that funded early projects that were able to scale up. And we've had a lot of success with the Toronto Atmospheric Fund, so much so that the provincial government doubled the endowment, and then the federal government doubled that, and then actually set up atmospheric funds across the country because they saw that they could build support for local action. So that's one thing. The City of Toronto has had a Toronto Green Building Standard since the City of Toronto Act was passed, and we were given the power to do that. And I think we got that power before a lot of other jurisdictions did, at least a lot of municipal jurisdictions across the country. And we've tried to use that as much as we can. We were an early voice in the C40 when then Mayor David Meller was actually the chair of C40 in its early days. Sometimes we've taken a bit of a turn and slowed our work down, but we really hope that through Transform TO, which is our climate plan, setting some of these bars as high as possible and then achieving them will, I think, reestablish us on that space. One of the frustrating things is the provincial government, because they tend to stifle some of our efforts, and they do this by removing some of the powers from the local distribution companies, who actually are there to as the utilities to implement some of these policies. And as the largest stakeholder or shareholder in our electricity utility in the City of Toronto, it really would be helpful if we had the necessary tools for that agency to help us achieve some of our energy efficiency and fuel switching goals.
Mike, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.